So recently, President Trump said something that surprised a lot of people, and it's actually a really good educational opportunity for all of us. So he had an interview, and the topic turned to heaven. And I don't know if you saw it, but he said, "I don't think there's anything going to get me into heaven. I'm not sure I'm going to make it." But then he added a defense and said, "But I've made a lot of people's lives better." So there was an unusual amount of uncertainty in his statement. He's not usually that uncertain. So this is someone who spent his entire life as an achiever. He's built towers, made deals, he's run for office. And then suddenly he's facing a question that every achiever eventually faces. What if heaven doesn't work like a business deal? What if you can't negotiate your way in? That's the achiever's dilemma. So we live in a very materialistic culture, and success is judged by what we accumulate. Naturally, we view, a lot of us in this culture are going to view eternal life as through that lens. So what do I need to do to get into that prestigious club, the most prestigious club, the VIP club, heaven? Well, the evangelical response to President Trump was swift. Franklin Graham said, "It's not about good works. It's only about having faith in Jesus Christ." And so here we have a debate. Is heaven something you earn as an achiever, or something you get through belief as a believer? From our perspective, both of those two perspectives are missing something crucial. The achiever's trap is thinking heaven is a reward you buy. For example, the president saying, "I've made life better for other people," is transactional. It treats heaven like a merit badge. But we can imagine a ruthless businessman who crushes people for 50 years, writes checks to charity on his deathbed. Has he changed? No. His inner reality, his ruling love, is still selfish. You can't buy your way in, because heaven isn't a place you go. It's a state that you grow into. Amen. Now, the believer's trap is thinking that we're part of an exclusive club for those who've got the doctrine right. If the achievers are going to buy a ticket, the believers think they simply hold the correct beliefs. But this is just magical thinking. It suggests you can internally be full of contempt. You could even hate people who aren't your faith or following your rules. But if you cite the right creed and you say the right words, you're declared innocent and you're into heaven. Right belief, having good beliefs, it's a good thing, but it's insufficient. As in the scripture in James says, when you have faith without works, it's dead. You can't separate your faith from your life. You cannot be happy in a place defined by love if you spent your whole life just loving yourself, no matter what creed you recited. So this isn't a new dilemma. Jesus dealt with this exact question 2,000 years ago. In Mark's gospel, a rich young man comes up to him and says, "Good teacher, what do I have to do to inherit the kingdom of heaven?" And it's really the same question the president's asking. It's the achiever's question. What must I do? What are the steps? And the young man is confident. He says, "I've kept all the commandments since I was a boy." He's an achiever. He's done everything right. Surely he's earned heaven. Now notice what Jesus doesn't say. He doesn't say, "You earned it, well done." That's the answer the achiever is expecting, wants to hear. It's not the answer that Jesus gives. But Jesus also doesn't say, "Just believe in me, and that'll change everything." That would be cheap grace, the believer's private club membership. Instead, Jesus says, "Go sell everything you have and give it to the poor, and you'll have a treasure in heaven. Then come follow me." Jesus is asking for transformation. He's asking that young man to change what he loves the most. Because Jesus can see that this man's ruling love is wealth, not God, not the neighbor. And you cannot enter a kingdom of love while clinging to a kingdom of yourself. And this is important why Jesus says it. Not so the guy gets into heaven, but When we start living that life that Jesus prescribes, we start experiencing heavenly joy here and now. This is not about something that we do for the future, though it has that benefit. It's something that benefits us immediately. It can give us a peace that passes all understanding. So the text says that the young man went away sad because he had such great wealth. He couldn't do it. His loves were too fixed. And so the achiever's approach doesn't work. And the believer's shortcut doesn't work either. So what does? Well, there's a third way, which Swedenborg was the one that helped me understand it. It's a pretty radical insight, but when you think about it, it makes common sense. And that is that you are essentially what you love. Think about it this way. Imagine you want to be a concert pianist. And you figure, okay, how do I negotiate my way into mastery? Do I go to a great teacher and say, look, I'll write you a check, and I'm going to purchase that ability, and I want to play Rachmaninoff but I'm never going to practice it. I just want to become a great pianist. Musical mastery is accumulated, and it's the result of 1,000 daily choices at the keyboard. You become a musician by doing music, not by understanding it or thinking about it or talking about it or writing a check for it. Heaven works the same way. It's not a club you get admitted to. It's a state of being that you build through the loves that you choose over a lifetime. If you love God and love others, then heaven is simply where you naturally belong. And what about hell? Swedenborg says it's actually hard to get into hell. Hell is an exit off of the path. You really have to be focused on yourself. And the analogy of the pianist could apply here too. Imagine that same person who never practiced, never really did any work with music, in fact, hated music. They found it annoying and they preferred total silence. If you force that person to sit in a conservatory for eternity, listening to symphonies and practicing every day, would that be heaven? No, that would be torture. That would be hell. Swedenborg explained that God doesn't send anyone to hell as a punishment. People gravitate there because that's where their ruling love is. Power, control, selfishness. And it can be expressed freely there. They wouldn't want to be in heaven, which is hard for people to get. The atmosphere of mutual service and lack of ego would feel oppressive. So you end up where your love leads you. You are the accumulation of everything you love and have chosen. But here's a question I'm often asked, particularly by Christians. They say, well, that all sounds nice, but there's this one passage where Jesus does say, no one comes to the Father but through me. Doesn't that mean that the only people that get into heaven are the people who espouse a specific belief in Jesus? Well, Swedenborg again offers a really good way of thinking about it. He explains when Jesus says through me, he isn't talking about buying a ticket. He's talking about following a path. Think of the difference between a map and a mountain. You can hold a map in your hand, you can memorize the names on it, and you can say, I understand this map. I believe this map. Through this map, I know my way through the mountain. But it's not the same thing as climbing the mountain. There's a difference. So Jesus, when he's speaking about the way, is not saying, I want you to intellectually agree with my biography, and you need to say the right words about it. What he is saying is, it's good to know the map, but you have to walk the path. The only way to divine union is to follow me and walk the path of love that I'm walking. He represents what is now called Christ consciousness, when we allow the divine to shape our lives. And this path is universal. The Buddhist monk, the Jewish rabbi, the secular seeker who loves their neighbor are all climbing the mountain, even if they use different names for the map. Jesus is not a gatekeeper checking IDs at the door. He's the model of what heaven looks like when we live it in human life. So, what does it take to get into heaven? The question itself doesn't really add up, because we don't get into heaven. We grow into heaven, starting right now. So we can stop being anxious about scorekeeping, and we can stop replying, just thinking that empty creeds will get us there without transformation. Instead, it's much tougher. We must start practicing. Just like the pianist sitting at the keys every day, we must sit at the keys of our life and practice heaven, practicing through service, purposeful action. But by choosing love over selfishness in every act and every day, we are growing our love for heaven. If you cultivate these choices, heaven won't be a place you need to sneak into. It will be your home. It will be where you naturally belong. Amen. Okay, now we'll open it up for any questions. Natalia?
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for your sermon. As always, it's very insightful and helpful. I just want to add my understanding. You commented on Jesus being the only gates, and my understanding is that on one hand, that's maybe true, but on the other hand, people imagine literally Jesus is the gates, but Jesus embodied absolute love, agape, and maybe he means only through me. It's only through love. Enter heaven only through absolute love. It doesn't mean literally through. Maybe some people never knew Jesus. How many people were there before they even Jesus was born, and maybe how many people didn't hear about Jesus in their lifetime. But to me, it's just be loving and merciful. And a second comment I want to make, as far as understanding who is in and who is out eternity, it's I like what my husband says, that we hope all for God's mercy, and the way he understands it, I chose to understand the same way. That on one hand, do we read that believe in God, believe in Jesus, and you are saved? Yes, there are places in the Bible that say that. On the other hand, there is a parable about sheep and the goat, sheep and the goats, and this parable obviously contradicts the statement that just believe in me. So I believe the most sensible and wise approach is to not judge whether people around us or even we ourselves enter, but try to do what God wants us to do, be loving and merciful, and just hope for God's ultimate love and mercy over us.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I first, your first point about Jesus being the path of love, I couldn't have said it better myself. So I think that's really a beautiful summary of what I was trying to get at. I think that is exactly right. And in fact, when I grew up in a different church than Swedenborgian, I was really stressed out about it as a kid, because I literally asked, like, what about our Jewish neighbors who are really nice? What about the Catholics? And people would just shake their head, sorry. I'm just sorry. No. And so that's a horrible thing. That's one reason why some evangelicals are really aggressive they're terrified for you that you're going to go to hell. So that is a very scary thing, and I really agree with you that it is the path of love. And I really appreciate your second point too, which, to your point, there's another verse where it says, on the last day, there will be many people who say, Lord, Lord, and I will say, I did not know you. So those are clearly people who believed, they thought they had the right thing, and then it goes on to say, when did I see you? Well, when you were with the least of these, that was me. So it points right back to it's a love of the neighbor. It's when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was, so that you're right about that it can be a surprise for people in that sense. And what I like that you stressed was that if you're in that heavenly state, you have no judgment for others. We have no idea of anybody's salvation, even our own. Like you're saying, we do the best we can. We try to live the good life. But one thing's very tempting for all people, but to say, I know who's in and I know who's out. I'm in, they're out. Once you're falling into that trap, you're stuck, and that is a trap. And I really appreciate the point that you do all you can. I'm touched in some ways in Swedenborg's understanding that hell really seems, in his description, as an off-ramp. Like you have to really want not to go to heaven. It's not like, heaven is not made as a test that most people can't get through on life. Everybody has a different path, and we have no idea what path anybody else is on, what trauma they have, what their parents were like to them, what their childhood was like. We have what mental issues they're dealing with. So it makes us very humble. We don't judge anybody. We just try to work on ourselves. So I really appreciate you raising those 2 points very, very clearly. Thank you. I'm going to turn to Glenn. You bet. Those are great points. Glenn?
I just wanted to say a word of thanks for your message. Like yourself, I was raised, where these words about our having that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me has so many times been interpreted that you have to then, therefore, enter into a relationship with God through Jesus in this Christian formula kind of living. I regard it as a transaction, and I think that it belies the fact that many people who have love in their hearts are able to have this relationship with God because they're living as Jesus lived and as Jesus lives. And they may be from a different faith tradition where Jesus is not primarily utilized as a figure of salvation or wisdom or someone that we should follow. But I believe that as they live their lives, they become more and more Christ-like as they live in love of their neighbor, for themselves, and to try to build a community of love. And in so doing, they're emulating Jesus. And I think that that's the essence of what what the Lord God is looking for in terms of who would be happy and welcome to spend eternity with me. It would be a terrible thing to try to insist that someone be there when that's not their desire. So anyway, I just wanted to thank you. You gave me further insight as to how to respond to brothers and sisters who still insist on that matter. So thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. And to your point, what I'm struck with in my life, I've been blessed by being raised in faith, but I meet so many secular people through my life who have no faith, and they do emulate Christ. And they have the joy of Christ. I don't know how, they don't pray, they don't have any belief, it seems, but they live this life of what I would call Christ consciousness. And they're a joy to be around, and they're joyful, kind, generous people. So it's interesting. Maybe the people of faith, like myself, that's we needed special help in this sphere. So that's a really good point, Glenn. Thank you so much. Jose or Katie?
Hi, Rich. This is Katie. Thank you so
Katie.
much for your sermon. I really enjoyed it. I'm just wondering, in the Swedenborgian tradition, does Swedenborg provide any insight on whether animals would get into what we consider heaven since they don't have the same capacity for making choices as humans do? I don't know. Maybe it's weird or just a random question. I was just curious.
Yeah, there actually it's I should do a sermon on this, and we should do a blessing that week, because I got asked the same question last night. I don't have a great answer to it. It does appear that in the next sphere, many near-death experiences. I'll go with that. Swedenborg didn't talk about it too much. He does talk about seeing animals on the other side, but in many near-death experiences, the pets seem to play a critical role. And I would also say, I think that pet culture, as a pastor, is much different than it was even like 100 years ago. Like, pets are really part of people's families now in a way I think they almost have never been. And so something there has changed too, and I'd guess that would apply to the spiritual world. He does describe heaven and the spiritual world as so similar in ways to this sphere that some people who pass into that world don't know they've died, and they have to be convinced because they're just like in another sphere. So it has trees and houses and animals and everything. So it seems like it's much of what is good and loved on this sphere is connected to that sphere. And but I'll do a little bit more research for you on that, because someone literally asked me that last night, and that person went to a animal like psychic or medium, and when they were putting their dog to sleep, and told a pretty profound story. So it's new. It's not something I'm not really that knowledgeable about, but I'll do some research on it, and maybe we'll do a sermon on it because it's coming up quite a bit. So I hope that answers. But it seems like the next sphere is just full of joy. You're in a state with people that share your love. I can't imagine it would be without the animals that were critical in that experience.
Where do I? Here, I got it. I had an observation,
Yes.
having had some very dear animals that I have lived with over the years, that animals have a huge capacity for love. Absolutely pure love. When you live with, my cats, you all know I'm crazy about my cats. But then when an animal has the trust and the love to another person or to another animal, you can see it in their face. They look at you and they radiate love. Dogs and cats do, and even squirrels that get tamed and little goldfish, they do experience pure love. And I don't know how that fits into things and all, but that I have observed.
Yeah, and I think Katie's saying thank you and agrees 100%. And yeah, and I would say our little community, we have a lot of love in our community, and notice the number of people who have pets. I don't think anybody has surpassed Annabelle with her now 6 dogs. Wow. But it is a competition, and so if anybody wants to try to match it, but it's based in love. And I'm sure that the I think it was President Truman who said, in Washington, if you want a good friend, get a dog. So there is that history. If you really want, that kind of love, it will be more likely through an animal than a person sometimes. So completely agree. David?
Like I said, just a comment that since we're all made in the image of God, we all have a divine spark in ourselves, and we are made to be in heaven And as Natalia said earlier, for the people who were born before Jesus's time, there has to be a way for them for some type of salvation. And even in today's world, there's hundreds of millions of people have never even heard of Christianity. Some of these countries where Christianity is even banned. And Jesus said to the thief on the cross, like, today you'll be with me in paradise, which translates into many different ways as like a beautiful garden or a beautiful place. And what's inside a garden? Well, there's all types of things. There's beautiful plants and aromas, and there's little animals. And if animals were not important, remember the story of Noah and the ark. God wanted to preserve the animals because animals are important to God. So, for those who have pets, if you, when you transition to the mansion that Jesus is building for you, you're going to be with your little pet. He's going to have the best food that he ever had in his life.
Completely agree, and completely agree with what you said at the beginning. That's what stressed me out as a kid, was like the whole idea that I remember saying, "What about all the people who lived before us?" And they were like, "No." And what about all the people in China? I remember, and they're like, "No." It's like, it was just so contradictory to a loving God. We learned that God is love, and that 95% of the world that didn't know had never heard it. And the worst part, David, is there's a lot of people who've heard the name, heard about Christianity, and I meet them all the time because they're angry when they find out I'm a minister because they've had a terrible experience in the church. So people who have heard about Jesus sometimes are the most angry because they'll tell you right away about the terrible pastor, the terrible priest. They'll tell me the whole story. So even people who've heard it. So I think you're right on about that. And I also, I'm hearing a second and a third on a sermon about pets. We'll incorporate that paradise in there too. Good point. Johnny, if you pass this over, please.
As I began my own journey of seeking spiritual growth, I came to understand that for me, a spiritual awakening is synonymous with a reduction of the role that my ego is allowed to play in my life. And I thought a lot about that and wondered why that rang so true to me on my path. And I see that as a baby, I'm incarnated on this planet, and I behave a lot like a dog or a cat. And I'm then taught to assume a personality as a part of my earth life. And in that personality, I begin to try to grasp control of all of the variables around me because I'm scared. Things don't feel safe. Things don't feel stable. And I just want things to feel stable. And, for me, my spiritual awakening happened when I began to see that when I turn control over to not Johnny, whatever is not Johnny, which is what I think of as God, not Johnny is God. Everything, the space between things and everything that is not my personality, I see as God. And when I turn things over to not Johnny, that vacuum that is filled by not Johnny is the divine. And in that surrender, I get to find peace. And so I really appreciated the message from the readings today, because that's what I see. That's what I hear from the readings. That like the St. Francis prayer, by dying unto myself and surrendering control to not Johnny, I find the divine and I find the state of heaven in direct proportion.
Yeah, that was beautifully said. And it reminded me of that passage that, we find ourselves in, when Jesus, to follow me, you have to lose yourself. Jesus says that. And most of the faiths, right, say surrender. You surrender your ego and your soul. One of the trickiest parts, I think, spiritually, is that a lot of religions say you have to completely divorce your ego from your soul. I think it's more complicated. I think we have to then integrate both. Like the ego can play a role with the soul on this planet, because we need to be sort of, am I making enough money? Am I paying my rent? Am I marketing myself? I mean, there's like ego things that you can, that raise themselves, but I really appreciate it. And as you were talking, if it's fair to share this, I think when we first met at the church, you came up to me and said, I'm a leader at HR at a very well-known firm, and I'm going to take a leap. I'm going to give it all up because it's not for my soul. I don't have a clear financial path, and I'm going to start coaching and training and just dealing a lot of stuff with your life. And I was just so impressed. You're like a perfect example of someone who did that. So I want to acknowledge, congratulate you for what you did, because now you run a very successful coaching, training business and so forth. But you got into the divine providence. It's very strategic to get into that path. Thank you, Johnny. Chris.
I was thinking, I don't know how old I was when I decided that phrase about entering into the kingdom of heaven through Jesus began to bother me. And I think it's because I liked architecture. And I might have been 10 or 11, and I was at a church camp or vacation Bible school, and we were singing 12 Gates into the City, okay? Oh, the Beautiful City, or something like that.
No.
And then I got to thinking, okay, 12 Gates into the City. I did a study thing with Jim Lawrence a few years ago about the 12 Gates into the City. But there are, as far as I'm concerned, there are 12 gates into the city, and it's like, that's not one, that's 12. And so maybe it's not just, maybe it is what we're talking about. And I do believe that it has a lot to do with the growth of self spiritually and focus and what our, life is like. But I think there's more than one way. I really do. I think there's a route for everybody. And if you've got those 12 gates, man, I think you got lots of options,
No.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. One thing that Chris is speaking to is in Revelations, there's a description of the holy city, and it says it has 12 gates. And in the Swedenborgian tradition, that symbolizes that there's many different pathways people come to the holy city, that nobody comes through one gate. And to your point, Chris, to me, as a believer in a loving God, which I believe that Jesus was God in human form, as teaching us love, if that's the case, why in the world would there be so many different religions and meet so many lovely, good people all over the world doing their daily life and doing their daily good, and somehow they're not in? It just does not make sense to me at all. You have to either choose. That's not a very loving God. So I completely agree with you, Chris. The 12 gates is a great analogy for how we get into the holy city.
And I do have to say, each of those gates is a stone.
Mm-hmm.
And each stone, if you look up correspondences and stuff, each stone represents different aspects of ourselves and, stuff like that. So I think it's really kind of good. But to just follow up on what you said, I do find it a conundrum, that's a mild word for it, that there are religions that function well for people that really, I think, have at their heart something that is quite significantly not good.
Well, I will say one thing about that. I have met a lot of people who would be in religions that I wouldn't think are good. I will say different people are evolving at different ways. And I know people, for example, in my experience, who had one example, had a very crazy lifestyle, got very much into fundamentalism, so much so that rejected me after that decision. They went from one extreme to the other, and I couldn't be happier for that person because they had serious addictive issues that were destroying their life. The fundamentalism has changed them for the better. It's a step. It's a step. So it gave them the structure, like everything was black and white. And just that I'm now on the outside. But that's okay, because I can see the advantage of that for that person. So it doesn't, we can't often make sense of it. Malcolm, I'll give you the last question.
Okay, well, to that point, Rich, and speaking of other religions, it struck me forcefully as you were delivering your excellent message that there's a very considerable convergence or resemblance between Islam in a fundamental way and Swedenborgian belief. Islam is usually identified as not a belief system, but a way of living, a way of life. There's only minimal belief in a divinity, a singular divinity, and in his altogether human prophet who revealed the revelation. But it maps out a way of life, which a way of living with the neighbor, which will be your path to heaven. So there does seem to me to be a rather striking resemblance in fundamental belief.
That's a great point. And to Johnny's earlier point that Islam means surrender, and I could do a sermon on that too, because Swedenborg has a whole description of why Islam came into the world, and that God willed it into the world for a reason. So maybe I could do a sermon on that at some point. Katrina, I noticed that you had your hand up. Did you have a?
I did. If I may sneak in two quick questions. If heaven is not such a bad place to be, or if hell is not such a bad place to be, should we still call it hell? And can we take peace in some shape or form on God's justice towards some who appear to be evil, but don't appear to get their justice in this life, in this world?
Yeah. So, the justice they're going to get, though, will be, it's interesting. They'll be in a community like themselves. So in other words, that's if there's the punishment will be being with people who share your love. So if all you are is selfish, you'll be with selfish people. We could look at that and say, oh, they're getting their just desserts. They would be with their greatest love. So that is a way of looking at the world, I think, that you could say, is there justice in the end? Yeah, there is. But I don't think we want to get too excited about the fact that they're going to get it. Because, again, we have no idea really what their path is or what. I had in my sermon a section on the world of spirits. The sermon was too long. But in the world of spirits, where we go before we go to heaven and hell, there's a chance to kind of learn what's going on. And what Swedenborg says is that sadly, most people are, they're already set. They can't change because of a million different decisions in their life at that point. Even if they could understand that they're in this thing, they can't change. So I guess the focus is really here and now. Our lives are very important, what we're all doing, and just keep loving others. And I see there's in the chat, I've always been stumbled by how Swedenborgian is unknown, such a small percentage of Christianity, because of the more liberal beliefs of how to get into heaven, basically being a good person, loving, no red tape. I always thought that would be more popular. Well, one reason, if you think about it, if you're creating a religion and you say that certain people, if you don't show up on Sunday or give in the offering plate, and espouse what I'm telling you as the pastor, you're going to hell. That actually does create a clientele. It does create people who don't want to miss, who feel like they have to do all these things and follow all these rules and listen to that person. So anyway, that would be on an earthly way, but it could have manipulation involved as far as their free will, but it could be attractive too. Also, anything that says, well, once you get into our club, our religion, you're good. Those people outside are bad. That's a very attractive human thing. Swedenborgianism doesn't do that. So it's that we don't have that sort of, we can't, you're the smart people and you're saved and the rest of them are going to hell. It doesn't have that. That's a very attractive human thing, but it's not a Christ consciousness thing. So that was a great point. And I wouldn't underestimate the impact that the Swedenborgianism as a religion, whether it succeeds or fails, is not that important. The concepts of the insights are being very much incorporated into all faiths, and that's really what God really wants. It's more of that kind of change. But we're still going to hold the beacon here and light and offer it here. So thank you for your questions, comments, thoughts. Hope we address them, and we'll wrap this up now.